My father had one rule when we were growing up. He kept it framed above the kitchen sink, in his own handwriting, on a yellowed index card. A quiet mouth doesn't mean an empty mind. I used to think that was just something parents say. I understand now that he was writing it specifically for me, preparing me for exactly this moment. My brother looked me in the eye across my father's hospital bed 3 days after the funeral and said, "Dad would have wanted you to be taken care of. That's why I'm handling everything," he said it softly, the way you talk to someone who doesn't understand English well. My mother nodded beside him, her hands folded in her lap, not meeting my gaze. My husband squeezed my fingers. I didn't say anything. I just looked at my brother, then at my mother, then at the stack of documents sitting on the nightstand that I had not yet been invited to read. I smiled and said, "Of course." My brother exhaled. My mother's shoulders dropped 2 inches. They thought I was relieved. They didn't know I'd already photographed every page of that document stack with my phone before they arrived. Have you ever been excluded from something that was supposed to be yours? Something your own family built, that you helped carry, that you were quietly promised your whole life? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Maya. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life I was the responsible one, not the chosen one. There's a difference, and my family never let me forget it. My father built Hartley Realty from nothing. He started with one rental property in Columbus, Ohio when he was 26 years old. By the time I was in middle school, there were 11 properties. By the time I graduated college, there were 23. He was not a rich man by any national standard, but by our standard, 2 kids, 1 income for years, a modest house in a good school district. He had built something. He called it the legacy. He talked about it at every Thanksgiving dinner, like it was a living thing, something that needed feeding and protection. My brother was groomed to inherit it. That was never said out loud, but it didn't need to be. My brother got the business classes paid for. He got the internship my father arranged through a golf buddy. He got his name listed on 2 properties as co-owner before he was 25, for tax purposes, my father explained. I got a handshake and a card that said, "We're so proud of you," when I passed the bar exam. I paid for law school myself, through a combination of scholarships, loans, and 3 years of working nights at a hotel front desk while studying during my breaks. Nobody arranged anything for me. I arranged myself. I don't say this to sound bitter. I say it because you need to understand the architecture of what happened next. My father had a stroke in October. He was 61 years old. Healthy by every measure he trusted, he walked 2 miles every morning, ate oatmeal, never smoked. The stroke came anyway, because the body does not negotiate. It happened on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, he was in the ICU at Ohio State Medical Center, unresponsive. By Thursday evening, the doctors were using words like significant damage and quality of life decisions. My father did not recover. He died on the following Sunday, quietly, with my mother holding his left hand and me holding his right, and my brother standing near the window checking his phone. That image has never left me. My brother at the window, near the end, checking his phone. I am an estate attorney. I have been one for 6 years. I specialize in probate litigation, which means I spend my professional life resolving disputes over what dead people intended to leave behind. I have seen families destroyed over furniture. I have seen siblings not speak for decades over a beach house. I know every trick in the book, the forged signature, the last-minute amendment, the mysteriously surfaced codicil, the pressured beneficiary change. I know what legitimate grief looks like, and I know what performance looks like. I know the difference between a will that was made carefully and one that was made in a hurry. So when my brother sat me down 3 days after the funeral and slid a document across the table to me, I kept my face completely neutral. I read every word twice. I thanked him for explaining things. I drove home, poured myself a glass of water, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The will my brother had shown me left the entirety of Hartley Realty, all 23 properties, the LLC, the operating accounts, the reserve fund, everything to him as sole beneficiary and managing heir. My mother received the family home outright and a monthly stipend. I received a lump sum of $40,000 and what the document described as personal effects of sentimental value to be determined by the primary heir. The will was dated 14 months before my father's death, which was unusual, but not impossible. What was unusual was something else. My father had a habit, a small, specific habit I had watched him practice my entire childhood of writing the date in European format, day, then month, then year. He had done this since before I was born, a holdover from 18 months he spent working construction in Germany in his 20s. Every check he ever wrote, every card he ever signed, every document I had ever seen his hand touch, day, month, Year. The date on this will was written month first. It was one small thing. Most people would never notice it. Most people are not estate attorneys who have spent 6 years looking for exactly this kind of thing. I didn't say anything to my brother. I went home, I sat at my kitchen table, and I started making calls. The escalation came fast, the way it always does when someone believes they've already won. 2 weeks after the funeral, my brother called me at 7:30 in the morning. I was getting dressed for work. "I need you to sign a transfer document today," he said. "No greeting. The accountant needs it to move the operating account into my name. It's just a formality." I told him I was in the middle of getting ready for work. He said, "This is more important than work, Maya. This is family business." I told him I'd look at the document and get back to him. He said, "There's nothing to look at. Just sign." I told him I'd call him later and hung up. He called back 4 times before 9 a.m. My mother called at 9:15. Her voice was strained in the way it gets when she's relaying a script someone else wrote. "Your brother is just trying to get everything settled," she said. "You know how he gets when things are in limbo. He needs this done today." I asked her if she had read the will herself, the full document, carefully. She paused. "Of course," she said, and then more quietly, "Your father wanted this." I asked her when she had last spoken to the attorney who drafted it. Another pause. "Your brother handled all of that," she said. I said I would be in touch, and I ended the call. That afternoon, they came to my office. Both of them, my brother and my mother, sitting across from my desk like opposing counsel, which I suppose in a way they were. My husband had offered to come, but I told him no. I needed to think clearly. My brother sat forward in the chair. He was wearing a sport coat that still had the price tag tucked into the sleeve, which he didn't know I could see. "You're making this complicated," he said, "when it doesn't have to be. Dad was clear about his wishes. You got a fair payout. $40,000 is not nothing." I asked him who drafted the will. He said it was a solo practitioner in Westerville, a man named Gary something. I asked if he had Gary's contact information. He said he'd send it to me. I asked my mother if she remembered my father talking about the will before he died, specifically this version of it. She looked at her lap. "He talked about the legacy going to your brother," she said. "He always said that." I said, "I know. But did he talk about this document specifically? Did you see him sign it?" She said, "Your brother handled all of that." That was the second time she said those exact words in 2 days. My brother leaned back. "Look," he said, "I know this isn't ideal for you, but you're the attorney in the family. You of all people understand how this works. The estate goes to the primary heir. That's me. I'll take care of Mom. Everything is going to be fine." He smiled at me. It was the same smile he used when we were kids, and he had already eaten the last of something and was telling me there had never been any more. "Just sign the transfer, and we move forward." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'll be in touch," I said. He stood up. "Don't drag this out, Maya. Grief is hard enough without you making it about yourself." My mother followed him without looking at me. I listened to their footsteps in the hallway until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I picked up my phone and called the Ohio Bar Association's referral line for forensic document examiners. I had started quietly the same week of the funeral, but now I accelerated. The first thing I did was contact Gary, the attorney who had supposedly drafted the will. When I finally did, he told me he had drafted a will for my father approximately 2 years prior, not 14 months, and that document had named my brother as managing heir of the business, while including me as an equal co-beneficiary of the LLC's net assets. He said he had not drafted any amendment or subsequent will. He said, cautiously, that he would need to review any document claiming to be a later version. I told him I would send it over. He called me back within 48 hours. He said the signature on the document my brother had presented did not match the one in his office files. He said he had never seen the document my brother was circulating. He said he thought I should speak to the probate court. I already had an appointment. The second thing I did was pull the notary stamp. Every will in Ohio requires a notarized signature. The notary ID on my brother's version of the will belonged to a woman who, according to the Ohio Secretary of State database, had surrendered her notary commission 11 months before the date on that document. Her commission had expired. She could not have legally notarized anything the day that will claim to be signed. I printed the database record. I added it to the growing file on my dining room table. The third thing I discovered was the money. While preparing to file a challenge to the will, I requested an informal accounting of the estate assets from my brother, which he was legally required to provide. The Hartley Realty operating account which had carried a balance of approximately $290,000 at the time of my father's stroke, showed a current balance of $41,000. I found 11 wire transfers over the previous 4 months, all initiated from my brother's access credentials, all going to an LLC called Hartley Ventures. Hartley Ventures had been incorporated 3 weeks before my father's stroke, with my brother as the sole registered agent. He had been moving money out of the estate before my father was even buried. The total transferred was just over $240,000. I sat at my dining room table looking at those numbers for a long time. My husband came and sat beside me. He didn't say anything. He put his hand on top of mine, and we just sat there in the quiet kitchen while I understood, fully, what my brother had done. He had not just tried to take the business. He had bet that I wouldn't look closely. He had bet that grief would make me foggy. He had bet that $40,000 and the right language. Dad wanted this. It's what's best for the family. Don't make this harder. Would be enough to get me to sign my name and walk away. He had constructed an entire fraudulent document and moved nearly $250,000 because he was so certain that I would not fight him, because I had spent 32 years being the one who didn't fight, the one who went quiet, the one who solved her own problems and asked nothing and made no noise. He mistook my silence for weakness. He didn't know it was preparation. My husband looked at the file on the table. He looked at me. He said, "What do you need?" I said, 2 more weeks. He said, "You've got it. I need to tell you about the moment everything changed. Not for my brother that came later, in a courthouse, in front of people he cared about impressing. I mean the moment it changed for me. It was 3 weeks after the funeral. I was going through a box of my father's personal papers that my mother had given me, looking for anything that might help establish his long-standing intentions, his consistent pattern of estate planning. And I found a letter. He had written it by hand, 3 years before he died. It was addressed to both my brother and me. It wasn't a legal document. It was just a letter, the kind a man writes when he is starting to feel his age. In it, he described the business. He described what he hoped it would become. And then he wrote something that I have read so many times since that I have every word memorized. He wrote, "Maya, I know I haven't always shown it the right way, but I have never once doubted you. You are the most capable person in this family. The business should have both your names on it. Make sure of that." He had never shown me that letter. I don't know why. Maybe he meant to and didn't get around to it. Maybe he thought there was more time, but it existed, in his handwriting, in European date format, signed the way he always signed things, his full name, and then underneath it, in small letters, Dad. I sat on the floor of my spare bedroom and cried for about 20 minutes. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes when something you needed to hear finally reaches you, even when it's too late for the person who said it to know you heard it. Then I stood up, added the letter to my file, and called the probate court of Franklin County to confirm my appointment. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Gray sky, cold November, the kind of Ohio morning that feels like the season has already given up. I wore the charcoal blazer I keep for important cases. My husband dropped me off at the courthouse steps and squeezed my hand through the car window. "I'll be right here," he said. I nodded. I went inside. My brother was already in the hallway with his attorney, a man he had hired 4 weeks after the funeral, which told me he had been planning this for at least that long, possibly longer. When he saw me, he looked surprised, and then, quickly, contemptuous. "This is a waste of everyone's time," he said. "Grief makes people irrational." I didn't respond. I walked past him into the courtroom and took my seat. I had filed a formal will contest on 3 grounds. First, the signature did not match authenticated samples on file with the original drafting attorney. Second, the notary stamp belonged to a commission that had lapsed before the will's stated execution date. Third, new financial records indicated substantial estate assets had been unilaterally transferred out of the estate prior to probate proceedings, in potential violation of fiduciary duty. My brother's attorney argued that my father had every right to change his will, that the document was validly executed, and that I was a disgruntled heir, attempting to overturn my father's legitimate final wishes. He said the word emotional twice in his opening statement. Both times he glanced at me when he said it. The judge was a woman in her late 50s who had, based on the reading materials visible on her desk, apparently been reviewing the file since before we walked in. She asked my brother's attorney a question about the notary commission. He said the notary had been a long-standing acquaintance of the family and that any administrative lapse was likely a clerical error. The judge asked him to clarify how a lapsed commission could legally notarize a document. He said he would need to research the specifics. The judge looked at him for a moment and then looked at me. I presented the file. Gary's affidavit first. Then the Secretary of State records for the Notary Commission. Then the signature analysis from the forensic document examiner, who had compared the will's signature against 15 authenticated samples and found statistically significant inconsistencies in 7 pen pressure markers. Then the estate account records, the wire transfers, the Hartley Ventures Incorporation documents, the timeline. The courtroom was very quiet. I could hear the heat cycling through the vents. My brother sat perfectly still across the aisle. I watched his face move through something, some internal reckoning I couldn't fully read from where I sat. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. My brother shook his head slightly. The judge called a brief recess. When she returned, she issued a preliminary ruling. The submitted will was to be set aside pending full forensic review. A receiver would be appointed to manage Hartley Realty assets during the investigation. The Hartley Ventures transfers were flagged for potential fraudulent conveyance proceedings. My brother was ordered to provide full financial disclosures within 30 days. When the gavel came down, my mother made a sound from the gallery. Not a word, just a sound. The kind that comes out when something you believed completely turns out not to be true. My brother stood up and his chair scraped back and he looked at me across the aisle, and for a long moment nobody moved. He said, quietly, "You did this to your own family." I looked at him. I thought about my father at the window, checking his phone. I thought about the letter on the floor of the spare bedroom. I thought about every envelope of goodwill and effort and silence I had handed over for 32 years. And I thought about the $40,000 that was supposed to be my inheritance from a 23-property real estate portfolio that my father had spent his entire adult life building. I said, "Dad built something. You stole it. I just did my job." I picked up my files and I walked out. The full investigation took 5 months. The forensic analysis confirmed the will had been altered. A signature page from an older, legitimate document had been physically detached and reattached to a new body of text. The notary had been located and interviewed. She confirmed she had never notarized that document and had not seen my brother in over a year before the date in question. Her stamp had gone missing from her home office, which she had mentioned to no one at the time because she assumed she had misplaced it. The Hartley Ventures transfers were ruled fraudulent conveyance. My brother was ordered to return every dollar. The total, with interest and fees, came to $247,000. The original will, Gary's version, the legitimate one, the one that included my name, was admitted to probate and recognized as my father's actual final testament. My brother was referred to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. He was ultimately charged with will fraud, document forgery, and theft. He pled to reduced charges. He was sentenced to 18 months, suspended to probation, with restitution, community service, and mandatory surrender of any fiduciary authority over the estate. He will not manage Hartley Realty. Not now, not ever. My mother called me the night after sentencing. She cried for a long time without saying much. When she finally spoke, she said, "I didn't know what he was doing. I want you to know that." I told her I believed her. She said, "I should have looked more closely." I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm sorry." I told her I knew. We stayed on the phone in silence for a while, which is, in our family, its own kind of language. She asked if we could have dinner sometime. I said yes. We have had dinner 4 times since then. It is not easy. It is getting less hard. My husband and I are now co-managing Hartley Realty. We kept the name. We kept the 2-mile walk tradition in honor of my father, which I do every morning before work, even in the Ohio winter, even when it's bitter. We hired a property manager for the day-to-day operations so I can keep practicing law, which is the part of my life I built entirely by myself and am not willing to give up. 2 months ago, we converted the smallest property in the portfolio, a little 4-unit building my father bought when I was 9 years old, the first one I ever helped him paint, into transitional housing for women leaving domestic violence situations. It operates at a loss that the rest of the portfolio absorbs. My father never mentioned this specific use in any letter or document, but I know, with the particular certainty of someone who has read his handwriting several hundred times in the last year, that he would not have been surprised. He always said the legacy was about more than money. He meant it. I'm just finally in a position to prove he was right. My brother is working at a warehouse outside Columbus. I know this because my mother mentioned it once, carefully, watching my face for a reaction. I didn't give her one. I hope he is finding something honest in it. I genuinely do. Anger is a useful fuel, but it is a terrible destination, and I have no interest in parking there permanently. There is something I think about, though. When I'm on my morning walk, and the neighborhood is quiet, and the cold is the specific kind that makes your thoughts very clear. I think about all the things that had to be true at once for my brother's plan to fail. I had to be an estate attorney. I had to know what to look for. I had to notice a date format that most people in the world would never register. My father had to have written that letter. Gary had to have kept his files. The notary's commission records had to be public. My husband had to say, "What do you need?" instead of, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Every single one of those things had to be true simultaneously, and they were. My brother bet everything on the idea that I was just the quiet one. He forgot that quiet and unaware are not the same thing. He forgot that some people learn to be quiet because they are paying close attention. He forgot, or maybe he never knew, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has been underestimated their entire life and has spent that entire life getting ready for the moment it matters. I think about my father's index card above the sink. A quiet mouth doesn't mean an empty mind. He was writing it for me. I understand that now. He saw something in me that he didn't always know how to say out loud, and so he wrote it in the way available to him on a kitchen wall, where I would read it every day without knowing why it mattered. It mattered, Dad. I want you to know it mattered. If you've ever been the one in your family who was overlooked, who was handed the lesser share, who was handed silence where there should have been support, I want you to hear this. The thing they underestimate in you is not a weakness. They are the ones who taught you to be precise, to be careful, to notice everything and say nothing until the moment comes. They built the tool they were most afraid of. They just didn't know they were building it. If this story felt familiar, drop a comment below. And if you know someone who's been fighting for what's rightfully theirs, share this with them. Sometimes the most useful thing in the world is knowing you're not the only one.